Hi, welcome to another video chat for MAN6931, our class on managing talent and culture. I'm Dr. Jen Crenshaw, and today we are going to be talking about culture. I'm sure many of you have heard the quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It makes its way around on LinkedIn. This particular article blog called attention 10 years ago to a time when this particular meme and quote was being seen a lot on LinkedIn. And then this writer decided to give a very real-time example. And yeah, it was 10 years ago, and digital media has come a long way. And the New York Times has caught up in a great way. New York Times using not only now lots of digital media, but lots of podcasts. And I think that they probably look back over the last 10 years and really look at the culture they had in the early 2000s into 2014 and 2015 and wonder if holding on to some of those time-honored traditions caused them to be slow to adopt some digital technologies. And so it is with that we say it's just an example where you can lead with strategy. What is the strategy we have for our business, or you can lead with culture. Leading with culture, being open to innovation, open to change, open to the ideas of your people. Strategy is about as good as the day it was written. Culture is something that is ever changing, and we're going to talk a lot about that today in this video chat. So, what is culture? Why do we think that culture and strategy are not rivals, but that both are necessary? One of the texts that we're reading for our class, the Vaughn and Powers text, defines culture as the values we share, the language we use, the behaviors we display, and the connections we have with others. Don't want to downplay the connections or the language we use, but certainly, no matter what we say or who our circle of people are, at the end of the day, the way you really determine what a culture is, the way you assess a culture, the way you can experience a culture is through the behavior of the people who are there playing out that culture every day. And it's something that we will come back to time and time again in my comments today in this video chat, and then also in our discussions with one another in class. Peter Drucker, known as one of the fathers of modern business, defined strategy as a pattern of activities that seek to achieve the objectives of the organization and adapt its resources and operations to environmental changes in the long term. Sounds a lot like there's a tie between Peter Drucker's idea of strategy and the importance of culture, right? So the patterns of activities, the patterns of behaviors, the things that we actually show up and do every day, right? That cause us to then ultimately achieve our objectives. So the organization is run not so much on its strategy documents and what we say we're going to do, our objectives, OKRs, I think we talk a lot about today. It used to be MBOs, management by objectives, but really by the pattern of behaviors that we display and the pattern of activities that we engage in. All right. So I want opportunity to read to you the writings and record, and you'll see this link here. You can go back. This deck is in our Canvas. Can go back and visit this link and hear this 2-minute writing by Paul Selopek. Paul is a cultural anthropologist, and I love what he says here when he is recording during one of his journeys in Africa. Paul says when he writes about the river of culture to you from the writings of Dr. Paul Celepek, a cultural anthropologist. I will be walking through many cultures on my walk. Already, I've trekked through a part of Ethiopia where two different groups of people herd their goats, desert nomads called the Afar and the Isa. In the small Red Sea country of Djibouti, there were all kinds of different people mixing on the waterfront capital. French soldiers, Somali traders, Syrian ship captains, restaurant owners from Yemen, and American diplomats. On my walking route across the globe, I will be meeting people from hundreds of different cultures. And what is culture, really? And how real is it? Back in the old days, people used to think of culture as something hard, inflexible, a collection of simple social features, food, dress, languages, and even a well-defined set of collective personality traits. But in truth, culture isn't so simple or so unchanging. Cultures change. Modern day suburbs where people drive cars and watch TV are as authentic a human culture as a remote mountain farm where people still light their mud brick houses with kerosene lamps. Cultures also mix and merge constantly as people move around, absorbing new ideas to put it into terms, the landscape. Culture isn't an oasis, a pool of water in the desert separated from another culture by miles of sand. Human culture is instead like a river, constantly flowing, mixing, with whitewater rapids and still pools, to be sure, but it's all interconnected. Culture is restless. It flows, it lives. I do definitely encourage you to go back and listen to Paul's recording of his own journal as he walks through the world. But I just loved this passage so much, right? Culture is like a river, ever moving, ever changing. There are theories of study that talk about how you like even in studying a particular culture, even in studying a particular phenomena, whatever it is, right? You have to recognize that it's ever changing. When I wrote my own dissertation on the career transition of Army veterans into the civilian world, right? I was speaking with veterans who had retired over a decade, right? So they had not all retired recently. I grouped them into categories of those who had retired more recently than others and looked for similarities and changes. And I can tell you that that landscape changed over time, right? The resources, the effort, the awareness that was put into the challenges of that transition changed over time. It is like that with the cultures in our company. And so it's a constant study. So, in leadership and wanting to be intentional about making an impact on the culture of your company, you have to be a student of that culture. You have to constantly be looking. What are we saying? What are we doing? What are the patterns of behavior we're displaying? And how is it changing? And what may be affecting those changes? So, as I've mentioned several times throughout class and writings and in these video chats, I very much enjoy working in a startup environment. And I've worked in several different startups now. This is my third as a chief people officer in a startup company. And what I've come to learn in my responsibility to help create a culture in a new company, in a startup, is that our culture will always be built one interaction at a time. Together, we can all live our values every day. So I always find that one of the very first things that needs to happen when you decide that you're going to bring a group of people together for the purpose of accomplishing a common mission, right? If we're building a company, we're bringing people together for the purpose of accomplishing a common mission. We need a set of values. We need to first define, what is our mission? Who are we? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And then how are we going to behave in the doing? Right? And that's those values and living those values every day, right? A lot of times people say, well, we chose values that are aspirational. Sure, they're aspirational, but the way that you actively create that environment so that you're moving from aspirational to actual is through those individual interactions. And so if you are a middle management leader and you're looking at the values of your company and you're seeing potentially some mismatches in places, and you're concerned that you don't have a lot of control over what happens and in building that culture, I say to you, you have a lot more control than you may realize. If you lead people, whether you have an actual team you're leading, meaning they formally report to you in the org structure, or whether you're on project teams where you're a subject matter expert on a particular team and you have the opportunity to influence and lead that team with your subject matter expertise. In any situation, the way you show up, the way you behave, your interactions, one situation at a time, one interaction at a time, gives you the opportunity to behave according to the values of the company, and that is actively creating that culture. I like to say we have a responsibility to create an environment where our behavior cause each person to feel that they belong, to feel safe, and to know how they contribute, right? We've been talking about this in psychological safety. We will continue to talk about it throughout class because really having an environment where people believe they are welcome, right? And we talk about that inclusion safety, being invited in, being given respect because you are here, because you are part of the team and feel welcome. That feeling truly safe, right? That all the way through our stages to that challenger safety of like, I can speak up. I can say when I think that something's going wrong and I'm safe. I'm not going to be thrown out of the group. I'm not going to be ostracized socially, right? To also understanding fully how I contribute to the mission, right? Because as humans, we are looking for that way to contribute to something that's bigger than ourselves. Whether it's wanting to just know that we are a contributor in our family unit, our nuclear family unit, or whether it's a drive to contribute to a larger mission. We want to know that we're here for something more than just our own well-being, right? That we're contributing to something greater than ourselves. And that is really, these are my tenets, if you will, for how do you create a great culture. Look, there is nothing about living this that is easy. We screw up one interaction at a time, right? We fail at times to cause people to feel truly welcome. We fail at times to be very clear about how every individual on our team is contributing to the mission. The clearest way to do that is through clear cascading goals and objectives, right? We know what we have to accomplish. What is each person doing to accomplish that, and how are they being held accountable? Those are easy sentences to say. Those are not always easy practices to put in place. Nonetheless, this is what I strive for and what I hope I accomplish in my current organization and what I would encourage you to accomplish as well. All right, so a little bit of practical application to how do we actually make this happen. So what are I say, culture is like a river. It's always changing. And then I said, right, it's our job to be active examiners of that culture, to study that culture, right? So when I say study that culture, that's where the senses come in, right? You're always sensing your environment. What do I mean? Literally using all of your senses, looking around, hearing what's going on, feeling it, tasting it, like really jumping in with your senses to the environment, right? Like, how do we treat each other? What do we celebrate? What causes us concern, right? When do we worry about what's going on in our company? What causes stress? Really listening to the trends, understanding their impact, right? You can do this with what's going on outside the company as well, but and you should, right? That earlier blog that was mentioned about the New York Times, right? The world was changing around the New York Times, right? Digital media was happening, and they weren't making that change fast enough. They weren't sensing it, right? They weren't listening to the trends. So this can be done outside the company, important for overall success, right? That you have a kind of culture that isn't navel gazing, right? That isn't so focused on what's going on inside that you forget to pay attention to the external trends. But also in building culture, so very important to pay attention to what's going on inside your own company. Okay, so you're collecting all this data. You're using your senses. You see what's going on. You hear what's going on. You feel what's happening around you. Then what? Okay, we got to respond. What are our first reactions? Those initial responses, right? What do we do? What do we change? What can we start to toy around with, right? This assuming that we want to make a change, right? We're sensing something that we feel like needs to change, right? That's how we then can respond. And then of course we adapt, right? Okay. If we don't change, we may not make it, right? If the New York Times had not changed to adopt digital media, to start doing more digitally, to look at ways that they could reach their audience without printing and delivering a newspaper, right? They would have died. Many newspapers did die, right? But the New York Times did change, and they were able to uh, adjust. And that's what we have to do as well, adapt, right? Okay. So what does that mean, right? Adapting, co-creating a culture. You have to have an unbelievable opportunity to positively impact the life of many people. This is a quote from Horst Schulze, a hotelier, former CEO of Ritz-Carlton. He was interviewed, and I gave you the link here. He was interviewed after having retired for only 1 week, right? So in that interview, he also said, excellence is not an accident. It is the result of high intent. You define yourself not by the product, but how you treat human beings, right? So look, in the hotel business, all the hotels can buy the same mattresses, they can buy the same pillows, right? They can absolutely, completely replicate each other. What they don't have is the other hotel's people. And Hort Schultz understood that. He understood, and in his article, well, it says it here on the front of this magazine where he was interviewed, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And please do go out and look at the 20 basics of the Ritz-Carlton guest experience. You will see that even in their promises to their employees, they promise ongoing training, right? It's not just if we have the budget. It's not when we have time. It is a core promise that Hort Schultz made as the CEO of Ritz-Carlton to the employees of that chain. All right. So in discussion thread this week, you have been talking about what is the culture where you work today. So excited about the answers that I'm seeing. Excited, like some of it very positive, some of it, makes me want to come help. But I just enjoy seeing the discussion around, what are the noticeable, definable behaviors, right? What are you measuring? What's expected, right? These are part of the questions. This is part of that sensing we just talked about, so that you can then take some action and adapt. All right. So, what are the practical steps of getting the culture that we want, right? Starts with clear expectations. What is our mission? What are we doing together? What is that clear set of values, right? Choosing your values, not so difficult. There are lots of methods out there to do that. I typically like to do a good old fashioned card sort, right? Like I take a whole list of potential values and I work with the leaders to say, okay, we're going to start with say 25 or 30 values and we're going to narrow it down to no more than 5, right? You do not want to have 25 or 30 values. In fact, it could even be less than 5, right? Maybe you want to have 3, but I'd say 3 to 5 is probably that sweet spot, right? We want to talk about, like, the values are, how do we commit to behaving? And then we need to be able to say why we've chosen these values. Why are we committing to behaving this way? So once we've narrowed it down to these 3 to 5, why is this important to who we are and what we do? Then, in determining the culture, we have to address what's in it for each team member. Why is this important to them? What does living by these values get them? What does it help us attain? Right? Some of that is our total rewards program. Do we have our values even built into how we compensate and reward people? Right? Is it worth my while to show up and behave in this way? And that, when I think of total rewards, right, are our benefits packages consistent with what we say we are and how we say we treat each other? Those are all questions that you have to ask as the leadership team. Then you have to make sure people know, right, how to actually behave, how to show up for each other. So you have to really incorporate these values into your onboarding program, right? Again, going back to that psychological safety, I've welcomed you in, right? You have that inclusion safety. Now I'm going to embark on that learner safety, right? I'm going to make sure that you have an opportunity to understand what it looks like when we show up for each other according to our values, right? What does that skills training look like? And then continued leadership training and development, because we need to help people learn how to be great leaders, leading with our values. And how do we behave when somebody isn't being consistent with our values? If we need to invite someone to leave because they're not behaving consistent with our values, how is that handled in an appropriate way that continues to uphold our culture, right? You can't say that you are an empathetic team culture, community culture. These are some of our values at my current company, and then mishandle how you treat people when, if you have to ask them to exit the organization, right? So you have to be consistent in all things. How empathetic are you? How community oriented are you? How team are you when you have to make those difficult decisions and execute on them? And so that's all part of leadership training and development. You have to talk about those things, right? You can't just pretend that those times won't come and that you don't have to have a muscle there to know how to flex. And then, of course, measuring and reinforcement, right? If you don't measure it, it's unlikely to happen. If you don't reinforce it, it's going to fall by the wayside. One of the ways that you can know if culture is important to your company, right? If we do have measurements, right? What's the return on this investment, right? If we have a budget line item and we're looking at the ways that we can make culture a part of our total rewards, a part of how we do business every day, how do we know if it's working? How do we know if we're spending money on the right things? This is so important. It should not be overlooked. All right. I'm going to mention this quickly. We're going to talk about this a lot more in a couple of weeks. But it was part of our text by Powers and Randall in the From Culture to Culture. Very last chapter talks about environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and governance sustainability. I bring it up here as a part of this chat today because this really is something that there was a time in our global economy when these ideas of environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and government compliance or sustainability was, we just didn't talk about it in business, right? It was very laissez-faire. It was assumed, right, that businesses knew that to be successful, they needed to care about these things. But there really weren't societal audits in place to really make sure that companies were following their own plans. And I would say that's very much changed, right? You see it in the news all the time talking about like what are these large companies doing to make sure that our environment is sustainable. Um, Social sustainability, this is where diversity, equity, and inclusion falls, right? What are we doing as a business community to make sure that we are being inclusive of all races, all genders, all nationalities, all different faiths, right? What is our plan? How are we measuring ourselves? So I hope you will take some time on that chapter in the Powers and Vaughn text, the ESG chapter, and I think you'll find their tools really helpful. And I look forward to that discussion thread in our class together. Thank you for spending time with me here, and look forward to future chats.